So, Alexandra, why did you become an astrologer and not a chemist or a restaurant owner because you're such a good cook? What led you to astrology?
Actually, it wasn't my idea initially,
Oh.
Gail. It was a friend of mine who became a friend, who was an astrologer, wanted to do my chart back in 1975. After he did my chart, I was looking towards architecture, designs, things like that.
Oh.
You know, I wanted to, listen, I wanted to find God. I mean, it's like I wanted a lot of things that had nothing to do really with astrology. Though I've always been into metaphysics and a spiritual life. But he looked at my chart and he said, you need to become an astrologer. And you're going to be a great astrologer one day. And I said, I don't want to be an astrologer. I have no interest in astrology.
Roughly, how old were you at this
I was
point?
17.
Oh, wow.
And so, and that's when and then he started giving me books and I started reading the books. But the books were like more like remembering rather than learning. It's just like all of a sudden I just started, and this is back in the day when there really weren't schools, there weren't, you know, today we have many branches of astrology available to students, lots of educational programs. Pretty much back then you were self-taught. There were some things going on in the Northeast. I wasn't there. So that's how I became an astrologer. And
You said that it felt like you already knew it. Does that mean you were an astrologer in a past life, maybe?
who knows? I mean, it just came really like I sort of just tapped into something that felt very familiar, and then of course since then I've done a lot of studying and some formal studying as well, but mostly practice. I'm one of those self-taught astrologers, as many people from my generation are, and from that period.
What organizations or websites do you look to stay current?
Well, I have a lot of friends and colleagues, you know, and I do so we visit off frequently. Several times a year, I travel to be with my colleagues. We do peer groups. We do small intensives. So there's always so I have that as a professional in my life, access in my life, but also today there are wonderful webinars through the OPA, the Organization of Professional Astrology, ESAR, the International Society of Astrological Research, NCGR, the National Geocosmic Research Society, and more, and the list goes on. The Astrology University. I kind of tap into, you know, most of the time, in all honesty, I haven't had that much time to sit around and watch stuff. I really haven't. And most of my stuff takes place either at conferences or in the small groups that I meet with. But especially today, I do have more time, and there's just a plethora of really, really high quality education out there for those who are interested.
If someone wanted to consult with you about their chart, how would they contact you?
They would contact me through my website, which is wisdomastrologyall1.com. That would be the best way to contact me. They can send me an email. My number, I think, is on there. They can text me as well.
So you can do them in Greek, you can do them in English.
That's about it. I can't do them in sign language, but I work online most of the time. I have, you know, most of the last 20 years, actually. So, yeah, most of my clients are everywhere.
That's great.
Yeah.
In what ways have you applied what you know to your personal life, to understanding your children, or thinking about getting married and saying, is this the right spouse for me? How have you applied it?
Well, as far as having kids, it's been so helpful. Not necessarily, you know, my first child was born in 1977, and it really helped me not to take too personally, you know, because you always think it's all about us, everything's about us, especially as a young parent, you know. I thought I had way more power and could wield more power and authority than we really can. So it's really so useful and valuable to know your child's chart and understand where they're coming from, to the best of our ability, to know their strengths, to know their challenges, to recognize that it's not just up to us. There's nature versus nurture for sure, but really, I think ultimately heredity is maybe 40 to 50% maybe of who we are. The rest of it really is choice. So, but as a parent, extremely useful. We have 3 children, and it's been also, sometimes they come to me, what's this all about? What's going on? So I've been able to also offer some guidance when I'm invited. I try not to push it. But for me as a parent, it's been very valuable, though of course it doesn't always eliminate the challenges of being a parent, but at least there's a deeper understanding, I think. Yeah.
What's an example of something that you learned from a chart that wasn't obvious, that really helped you as a parent?
Things, of course, come incrementally. I think, like they say, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. But in the same way here, I think for one of our children, I didn't realize to what extent so their sensitivity and vulnerability prohibited them from being able to communicate in a healthy fashion. And I struggled with that. And over time, I thought, oh, well, of course, I get it, of course. I have it was very helpful to see that. And it didn't take away the challenges, but it took, at least I understood it more clearly where this child or this adult is getting stuck or was getting stuck, yeah.
What about in terms of romantic partners, spouses?
Well, this is a good story. Actually, it's a good story. Always. I mean, my first husband, I met him before astrology, though we got married after astrology. We got married in '76, so I just had started. And I knew enough to know it worked. It could work. Because just because things have potential doesn't mean they work. Right?
Good point.
Because everything is determined by the level of consciousness of the individual, right? There are many different ways that we function. So, compatibility does not equate to success in relationship. Just as I've seen, I know I'm diverting for a second. Just as I've seen some difficult charts really be able to make it work, but a lot of that is determined by what is the need of that individual. Some people really thrive in conflict or difficulty. Some people do. Not everybody does. So you have to take a lot of things into consideration. There's just no basic recipe here, really. But back to your question. I remember meeting my second husband, whom I just thought was like Adonis. He just was like, oh my God, I've met a god. And getting his birth data right away, and erecting his chart. This was back in '79, '80. And I thought, this is terrible. This is like kind of a no-go. I just don't see how this is going to work all that well. But then I thought, this is 40 years ago. 40, maybe one even. And I remember thinking, no, I'm just not going to let astrology, tell me how to live my life. We did our relationship, and we actually gave birth to this amazing being from that. But it was very difficult. And all the things that I was concerned about, a lot of them were, they didn't project them, they really were. It was a very challenging relationship. And so that was a lesson learned. That was a real lesson learned.
But on the other hand, maybe you needed those
exactly.
challenges.
So there are, and when I go back and I've done some research, it's like, what did I need? What did he need? All of that. Plus learning this lesson too. So I'm in my third marriage for the last 32 years. 30 years we just celebrated. So I did his chart, of course, right away, and I was going to adhere more closely to my own advice this time. So here we are, decades later. Yeah. The second one was the first two were pretty short-lived. So yeah, I think that having some as, consulting an astrologer is really wise if you're thinking of partnership. I always think that. I always believe that. Of course, like I said before, compatibility in a horoscope does not mean that it's going to work out, because people have to be in the same place at the same time in their life. There are many different equations that enter into a relationship.
What's an example of something that you learned from this husband's chart that helped you in the understand him in a way you wouldn't have, at least not assumed?
You mean who?
Ed.
Ed. Well, that's a good question. As an example, this is a good question. I don't think I need to get. I don't know how astrological I should get here. I want to kind of keep it in plain English, so I'll try. But we have many things that are common, values and so forth, which is very helpful. But our emotional patterning is almost opposite. I'm very Aryan. I'm very spontaneous. I'm very autonomous, and kind of do my own thing. And this is how because this is reflected by the moon in the chart. And the moon in the chart essentially is our defense mechanism. It's our survival patterns. And this is how I survived. And this is part of my personality. His, on the other hand, is exactly opposite, Libra. So his tendency is to want to relate, want to create balance, want to cooperate, want to ask before he does something, whereas I'm off running on my own, So this has been really useful, and I started kind of grokking it at about year 15. Because I'm kind of slow, but it's been very useful to see how this is one way that opposites do complement one another if you're willing to do the work. I've helped him become a bit more independent and autonomous. I can't speak for him, but I know he has helped me become a lot more considerate and willing to work with another at someone else's pace, for the most part.
Another way besides the natal chart to use astrology is to see what's coming in the year ahead in the projected chart.
Well, okay, there are many different, it's not called projected. There are many different tools available to us. I think what you're referring to is the secondary progression chart. There are a couple different kinds of progressions, actually many different kinds. I'm not going to get into them. The one that is two that are most frequently used are solar arcs and secondary progressions. And they essentially, because astrology is a language, and it's a symbolic language, and so it's like learning another language. So with this tool, you're able to see how speak in English or whatever language we're speaking, to see how we evolve, what our potential is, because there's a trajectory. It doesn't matter where we start. We can start at A and go to B, or we can start at G and go to H. It just doesn't matter. But we all have. There is a method to the madness of nature. And astrology really is a science that also it's about cycles, many various cycles happening simultaneously, and there is a progression from seed to maturation, and then to death again. And this is all, and so through our progressions, we can see how we're evolving, where we're at in certain places, in certain areas of our life, as well as within, so without, as certain places within our own self, potentially. Yeah, there are no guarantees.
So on or near your birthday every year, do you look at the chart for the year ahead?
I always tell people, most of my clients, a lot of my clients will ask, when can I come see you again? When is it? I always say sometime around your birthday is nice, because then we can also, along with the progressions, we can look at your solar return chart, which is essentially, it's like we are all born in a particular day when the degree is at a particular when the sun is at a particular degree. The sun goes back to that degree every single year. And our computer, because I don't have to do it by hand anymore, takes a picture of that moment when the sun is, let's say, at 13 degrees Gemini in 44 seconds and some odd minutes, goes back there, captures that picture, and that sort of becomes a sub-theme for that particular year, which it's kind of a fade in, fade out. It begins usually about a month, maybe. It can begin a month before, around, or right after our birthday. But and I like to use that with transits, the progressions, and the solar return. I like to use all these three, at least these three, depending on what I'm doing. Because I think they're just wonderful ways to get insight and also confirmation of the themes that are currently up in someone's life.
In terms of the pandemic, in terms of the global crisis, it's such a huge phenomena. I wondered if there were any astrological forecasting that something is going to happen in the spring that's going to be big.
You know, there have been a couple of astrologers that have referred to it. Right now, I'm reading a book. I've just started, but I know it's in the material because I've discussed this with one of my colleagues, by an astrologer who's excellent by the name of Christine Skinner from Britain. And she's a financial astrologer. Her latest book is called Navigating the Financial Universe. And she, you know, a couple years ago, she, from an economic perspective, saw, she actually says it in her book, that, you know, she thinks that there's going to be some kind of virus that happens, which is going to affect the global economy and everything else that trickles from it. But because her angle, of course, and she uses a lot of, like I said, I haven't read the whole book yet, but she uses a lot of solar activity, and a lot of astrologers and astronomers gauge solar activity. The sun actually goes retrograde and also goes through its own motions. And in fact, I'm just editing an article written by a Turkish astrologer. He's a traditional astrologer by the name of Onur Doser. And this article actually is on pandemics. And he goes back to like 1347 with, which pandemic was it? The Spanish flu. I think it was a Spanish flu, that one. But all of these pandemics that we've had, the last 4, have had certain signatures that we've just entered in 2019. Some of those have to do with, again, solar activity. The solar activity being at a very minimum right now. It's much more complicated than that, and people can study up on this, but it does have to do with solar activity.
You mean actual, like, sun flares and that kind of thing that's right now?
Magnetic field stuff, absolutely. Big stuff, actually. Astronomy, I mean, real, you know, this is for the scientists, but which we use because these two pieces come together. And also where the eclipses occur in the parts of the solar system, the parts of the signs that they occur in, this is the 5th one in the last 700 years that are, and we're just back in it again as of May 4th, the lunar nodes are going to be in Sagittarius and Gemini. And Gemini has a lot to do with respiratory issues in medical astrology. So, and viruses seem to have been each and every time. And you know, this doesn't happen that often, you know. So there are themes, and Jupiter-Pluto conjunctions seem to be a repeated theme. So there are certain signatures to this. And of course, you can imagine, everybody almost is writing something about what has happened. Hindsight's 20/20,
right?
You know. But when people, you know, kind of look forward and talk about this stuff, it's very interesting because Christine's owners, a guy named William Stick Evers from New York, also has talked about this in advance.
What are they saying about the November elections in the States?
Well, I'll tell you, this is going to be, you know, in the astrology world, regardless of what school you come from, what tradition you come from, we've all been saying for the last 10 years, 2020 is going to be big. But, you know, it's like, I also am not somebody who every decade has doom and gloom forecasting. It's like just part of our human nature to move in, to swing like that. But we've known 2020 is going to be big. We just
big meaning chaotic,
big and intense. Right now we are, and in 20 since 2018, 2019, 2020, 21, 22, we're at the very end, the balsamic phase of these slow-moving planets, and we're looking right now. Jupiter isn't that slow; it's about a year per sign. Jupiter 2.5 years roughly. Pluto this time, he's been in Capricorn from 2008. He's going to exit Capricorn in 2024. Okay, so his Pluto's cycle varies because it's rather elliptical, really elliptical. So we're at the last degrees of the last Earth sign of the zodiac, Capricorn. Capricorn tends to be sluggish anyway, tends to be mud-like, moves slowly, tends to be austere. It governs large institutions, governments, politics, infrastructure, countries, large institutions.
But they're mountain goats, aren't they? Spry and agile?
Things change slowly in Capricorn. It's about climbing the mountain, right? Slowly but surely you climb that mountain. You don't get there like that. And so, and remember, we're at the end of this cycle that's really been going on. There are many cycles, like I said, going on simultaneously. And without boring you, because we're looking at nodal cycles, we're looking at different synodic cycles. And when I say synodic, it's different conjunctions that have happened. The last one of Neptune and Pluto, where they begin, where they're at now. But where they're at right now, we have Jupiter. Actually, Saturn just dipped into Aquarius. He'll come back into Capricorn later on this year until he goes fully into Aquarius in December, when he conjoins. Jupiter and Saturn will be conjunct. And
which means both, close together.
Yeah, together. In fact, I don't have the dates. I can go get them. No.
We can write them on the
Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is in December 21st. And I think it's again at the last degrees of Capricorn. So we're just finishing this Capricorn phase, which has to do with, and since 2007, 2008, when Pluto started moving into Capricorn, and Pluto, remember, is the god of the underworld, and so things don't change suddenly. Things erode from the bottom slowly. And everything that is dark and hidden slowly begins to percolate to the surface. And now, as it's moving towards the end of the cycle, we're seeing more and more of the way our infrastructure, our corporations, large systems, where they are cracking. And that's the whole goal. And so knowing that Jupiter tends to expand, tends to magnify whatever it touches. So with Pluto there, it's magnifying everything. Okay, it's not always a positive thing, but it depends on what you mean. I don't know what's good or bad, but it's magnifying some of the challenges, right? But it can also, historically, Jupiter, Pluto we've also seen inspiration and new things coming out of times of difficulty, which this will continue because it's just begun its new synodic, new conjunction cycle just in this last month. So,
what does that say for November?
Let me go back to November. Okay, this year, not only do we have all this Capricorn energy, which is heavy, austere, conservative, doesn't want to change, power, it's all about power. This is why it rules big government and corporations and big stuff. But this year, we also have a Venus retrograde cycle.
And retrograde means it's going backwards in its orbit.
It appears to be going back. It appears because if you think of the sun here, and the Earth going this way, and other planets going that way, some planets move faster. So by the time they get here again, and we're still here, it looks like they're moving backwards. They're behind us. Okay, for Venus, that happens about 1 year, 0.6, something like that, okay? And for Mars, about 2.2 years, something like that, 2.5 years, 2 point something. This year, they're both going retrograde. Bear with me a second. Now, Venus goes retrograde every, like I said, let's say 18 months for the sake of, I forget, it's like a 160 some days, I think. My numbers are not always,
That's good.
them. But every election year, Venus tends to be in Gemini. It just so happens because it goes into the same sign every 4 years. So during this period, not forever, but during this period of one of my colleagues and good friends, Ariel Gutman, who is the Venus star lady, she has all the numbers. But for the last many presidential elections, and as we go forward to a few more, at least several more, it's going to be in Gemini. So in Gemini, we need to be mindful also of media, overabundance. We need to be mindful of
Trump is a Gemini.
We need to be mindful of how much we allow into, and also the nodes are moving from Cancer, Capricorn, to Gemini, Sagittarius. They are in a retrograde motion. And the nodes, the moon's nodes simply are where the Earth's cycle around the sun, the ecliptic, or at least here's the Earth, the sun seems to go that way, the moon seems to go that way, and every so often they cross. And that's what we call a node, okay? And so there's the crossing node of the ascending, the north node, and the crossing node of the descending, the south node, based on these orbits, okay? It looks kind of like a molecule, actually. They stay in the same sign for a couple of years, a little over 2 years.
The nodes
a year, 20 months, I'm sorry, something like that. And now it's going into Gemini, Sagittarius, which Owner, in his research, found in past pandemics, that's where it's been as well. So, and we're going into it now on May 4th. It's changing into the Gemini. So Gemini has to do with information. Sagittarius has to do with our beliefs. South Node is in Sagittarius. So over the course of the next year and a half, 2 years, let's re-question our belief system and how much information. I mean, we're getting information. We've been inundated since really the tech highway, but now it's just been insane, right? So we need to be really more conscious of how much we're allowing into our consciousness and to our mind stream, because it's overwhelming and can be very superficial, confusing. So, but that's the direction. Now, Venus is going to go retrograde May 12th of this year, and it's going to stay retrograde until June 24th, and it's going to stay in Gemini. It's in Gemini right now. It's already entered Gemini. It's going to be in Gemini until about August, early part of August. So a long time. Okay, so that's important because this is an election year. So we're looking at a lot of misinformation, and in the past several elections, the media has been largely responsible for who gets elected. It's about information. It's about how candidates are portrayed via the media and how they want to portray themselves or how others are portraying them. So we need to be really thoughtful about what it is that our belief system, what it is that we're learning, how we're going to integrate them in a sensible and wise fashion. And this has been happening during election years. Now, as we go towards November, we're going to have Mars retrograde. Mars hasn't been retrograde in over 2 years. He's going to be in his own sign of Aries. So it strengthens. Mars is the god of war, and he defends by offending. He attacks to protect. Okay? And he's going to be in a lot, and during the election, and especially in October, it's going to be tough. Because Mars is going to be, and if I get too technical, stop me. Mars is going to be in Aries. I think he starts at about 28 degrees Aries, goes back to 15. So he's going to be a lot of the time in the mid degrees there, 20-ish, más y menos. And he's going to be in Aries for 6 months. Also, tough stuff, because Aries and Capricorn are what we say in a 90-degree aspect, which is what we call a square. Square creates tension and conflict. But this is how we resolve things. We don't resolve things in trines. We resolve things in conflict.
Well, that's interesting. And trine is 120 degrees.
Exactly. And it's like a pyramid shape. Energy flows much more smoothly. This is more creative. This is more free-flowing energy. And it's wonderful for creativity and intuition. And but we can also get indolent. We can also lose our sense of vigilance with trines because things are fine. Why fix it if it ain't broken? It's the trines and the hard aspects that give us oomph. Okay, so Mars is going to be retrograde in Aries, conjoining in October. I should have brought my fingers out here because I have all these dates on my little sheet here. Conjoining his sister, Eris, the goddess of discord. She's called the Discordia. In the Roman mythology, Eris.
Is she represented by a planet or some heavenly body?
Yeah, she is. Eris is actually bigger, or about the same size. It might be a little bit bigger than Pluto. Pluto's orbit, just to get you an idea of how far away she is. Pluto's orbit around the sun, más y menos, because it's elliptical. It's about, let's say, 246 years, something like that. Her orbit around the sun is 570 something.
What is she called? She's not a planet.
She's called a dwarf planet. She's in the same category now as Pluto.
Ah.
But we call Pluto a dwarf planet. We can call him whatever we want. But we, in astrology, his power, the symbolic power of that energy is enormous. It's, little but potent, small but very potent, because it works, like I said, it eats away at foundations from the bottom and helps us see our shadow side. God, he's the god of the underworld. So it's about seeing the darkness, seeing wherever it is, and in our own personal chart, wherever Pluto is, he shows us where we may have these complexes where we can be unconsciously unconsciously controlling because we feel vulnerable there.
Right.
So as I mentioned before, we're going to have Jupiter, and there's going to be Saturn again and Pluto all in Capricorn during the elections. The Sun in the elections is going to be in Libra, another cardinal sign opposite Aries. So it's squaring, both are squaring.
Isn't that Scorpio, November 8th?
When I'm talking about the retrograde, I'm talking about just before the elections, okay? But this is just before the elections, hold on. But just before it goes into Scorpio until like October 22nd, we have these, it's going to be like, I don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be really intense, I think. And for anybody who has planets or energies in those middle end degrees from, like, let's say 20 to 28 degrees, 30 degrees of Aries, Cancer, Libra, or Capricorn, they're feeling it in their own lives. This is, now. So there's a lot of activity, a lot going on, a lot of dissonance. And Eris loves to, she was pretty much single-handedly, was the reason the Trojan War begun, right? It was like she was the one that threw the apple to say, to tell, who is going to be the fairest of them all. How Paris was going to, who he was going to. And she did this. Eris likes discord. She likes to see people fight. She likes to win, but she'd rather see you lose. Yeah. And this is part of her myth, right? And I don't want to get into it completely, but basically, she loves to cause chaos. Now, the good news about Eris is that she also helps us become competitive, so we can win. That's the good news. So, and ideally, the competition is always, within, how can we be our personal best, right? But anyway, so we have the two siblings there, god of war and goddess of trouble, in a sense, discord, making the squares to those outer planets I mentioned, and the opposition to the sun. During this period of time, till the day of election, Mercury's retrograde. Again, it happened with Bush. So, I mean, it's just like a perfect storm.
So hopefully it'll stir everything up that can be cleaned out.
There's probably going to be, again, this, the numbers, the misinformation. Mercury's going to be retrograde. How are the ballots? Already we're talking about it. It's like the mail-in ballot. Who's doing what? How is this going to unfold? So, I usually like to see things in a positive. I always like to cast things in a what's the best possible outcome?
And what's the lesson?
That's the way I like to look at it. But I'll tell you, I mean, I've been looking at this for a while and thinking, we all knew this was going to be, we never imagined, I didn't imagine, really what it was going to look like. I mean, and, face it, a lot of what we're doing right now with this COVID-19 actually has so many positive aspects to it.
And
our planet is thanking us. Are you kidding? Up
pollution,
and down. I mean, we are just, our precious planet is just like saying, thank you. I really appreciate this break. And so we'll see. Hopefully there's going to be, I don't know if we'll really change our ways because we seem to be dense and money, follow the money. But at least we're documenting things. At least there's the environmentalist groups will have a little bit more ammunition to maybe work with. I don't know.
And everything is out there in terms of the information blitz.
Oh, everything is out there. But also is the fake news. I mean, ever since Neptune went into Pisces, it's been the fake news media, the delusion of Pisces and Neptune, because it's like a double, Neptune rules Pisces. It's in modern astrology, Jupiter and Neptune. And so it's really about disillusionment, illusion, whatever we believe can be true. Yeah, especially since 2012, when it launched its way into Pisces, and it's going to be there till 26. But the different aspects that it's making as it's doing its dance here. The fake news is just, and I don't care whose side on, everybody thinks there's fake news, So there's a lot of information, and especially now with the nodes moving and Venus in Gemini, and this new star point that it creates, again, before it begins its forward cycle for the next 4 years. It will have a strong Gemini influence again, as it has.
And as I said, it's interesting that Trump is a Gemini.
Yeah.
And Rudy is a Gemini, and Newt Gingrich is a Gemini. But so was JFK.
Yeah, right. I mean, we can find a lot of things. There's that's a great discussion to have, to look at political leaders and to see what themes are in their chart. November it's probably going to be pretty darn hairy. I just can't see, even I who like to see the best, it's going to be a rat's nest, because that Mercury goes direct the next day.
Well, hopefully it will reveal the rats, and they can be cleaned out. And that's...
Well, we have, for the last 200 years, we've had the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions have been in Earth signs. Each time, every 20 years, they conjoin. And there was one time, and that was, I think it was in Libra, in the last 200 years, once or twice that it was in an air sign. Otherwise, all their conjunctions have been in Earth. And so this has been part of the Industrial Revolution. This has been part of growing materially, using the resources of the Earth. Now, for the next 200 years, they're going to be in air signs, starting with Aquarius. So we're really looking at, instead of growing materially and just about the material world, the dense world. We're looking at concepts, social ideas of how do we grow socially, how do we grow ideas, how do we grow ways of living socially. It's about all the air signs have to do with relation.
And when does that start? The dawning of the age of Aquarius?
This starts in December.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, that's
and then there's a new moon in February that really kind of kicks this off. So I suspect that around the early part of next year, too, we will see some real relief from this virus. But I think there's going to be, ebbs and flows here, but I don't think we're going to be, I think this is going to be something that stays with us, not because of the virus, but because we're learning how to live another way here.
Why does astrology work? Because people say, oh, it's not a science, it's a pseudoscience, the zodiac changes, so the system that was developed thousands of years ago can't be accurate now when the zodiac is in different places. So what's your understanding of why where the Mercury is in my chart has an impact in my life?
Look, this is all observation. Let me go back to that first question of the zodiac. Well, first of all, there are two, let's say for simplicity's sake, two schools here. There are two different zodiacs that are used. The tropical zodiac and the sidereal zodiac. The sidereal zodiac is what Vedic, Jyotish, Eastern astrologers use. And that has to do, it's about the zodiac, okay? When we first started using astrology thousands of years ago, the Sumerians, go back to Babylonian, it was just really, and you could see up to, you could, with the naked eye, up to Saturn. So it was, and using fixed stars and being able to track things and then sort of record events and again, even starting with the daily cycle, then going to the lunar cycle, then going to the phases of the moon, then looking at every single planet has phases based on what it is that it conjoins, primarily also the sun. So just studying it, they were able to glean a lot of information and use it in their daily lives. They used it in every way, certainly for agriculture, for wars, for, all kings had their astronomers, astrologers. They were one and the same. So in Vedic astrology, in Jyotish, they actually look, because of the precession of the equinoxes, now when it's spring equinox, it's not at 0 degrees Aries anymore. It's 23 degrees back, okay? So it occurs really in Pisces now. In tropical astrology, we don't use, it's not as the zodiac that we use. We use, it's basically, it's a seasonal calendar. We use the 0 degrees, the cardinal points, 0 degrees of the cardinal, 0 degrees Aries, looking at the summer solstice at 0 degrees Cancer, autumn solstice at 0 Libra, and then winter solstice at 0 Capricorn, in terms of seasons. So, and like I said before, this is a symbolic language. So at spring equinox, it's the new beginning, literally. It's the beginning of a new year. And in the language of astrology, that is represented by the sign of Aries, followed by the sign of Taurus, and so forth. And then at summer, at the highest point that the sun is in the sky, it's 0 degrees Cancer. And we use the qualities. Again, it's a symbolic language. It's archetypal. It's not literal, the way we use it in tropical astrology. And it works.
Carl Jung used astrology,
right? He used tropical astrology, yeah.
And he thought in terms of archetypes.
Remember, it's archetypal. So when we're talking about, even, we were talking about relationships earlier. Again, we're looking at the compatibility of archetypes.
So it doesn't have anything to do literally with where Mars is in the sky, like from an astronomical point of view?
Yes, it does, absolutely, based on where you were born, absolutely. But in the tropical zodiac, we still use 0 degrees Aries as the beginning of the zodiac, because, as I said, the zodiac, the astrology is a symbolic language. Okay, technically, at spring equinox now, the sun is in Pisces. That's what the sidereal astrologer would use. I have found, I've studied some sidereal, it's really interesting, I mean, it works, but what I wrote an article, I don't know if you ever read it. It was called the Uranian-Saturnian Dialectic, and it was for a conference I spoke at in India, and it had to do with different systems of astrology, these two different systems. There is the Saturnian, which has to do, we were talking about Capricorn, more conservative, old-fashioned, really looks at the Jyotish system too is based on a much more predictive type of astrology, whereas the tropical Uranian dialect has to do more with, in the Western world, the way it's been cultivated, has to do more with personal free will, how we're individuals, not necessarily part of our family systems have changed. I mean, now we live all over the place, whereas in still a lot of the world, it's not like that. Family systems are still much more intact. Your role, not only in family, but in your community, is much more severe than it is. So it's not to say one is right or one is wrong. It's just you find something that works for you. But I have found that, I've had charts done. The Vedic is a little bit more, this is how it's going to be. A little bit, there's less of a free will there. Whereas in tropical, there are many, of course, like I said, traditions in tropical astrology as well. Many. But you have a little bit more of a choice. Now, there was a question, I think, that I'd seen, or maybe I heard it in my head, but this about fate or free will. I mean, it's a little bit of both. I mean, look, we are a combination of our DNA. Where do we come from? People ask me, is this from a past life? Oh, yeah, maybe. I don't know. All I know is that we are in a continuum. Everything that we do right now will have a consequence tomorrow. Everything that we did yesterday has a consequence today. And both of these go far, far out in these directions. How far? It's up to you to figure out how far you want to go, depending on your interests and your proclivity. So, we are a combination of our socioeconomic, our genetic, racial, where we were born, all that stuff plays into it. And you can say, well, yeah, that's because of actions taken in past lives. This is what has brought us to the, and that's, it's not a point to defend or argue. Makes sense to me, right? But also as we go, so we're given a certain set, we're born at a given moment, so symbolically, archetypally, we have a certain combination of traits that usually run in the family system, because the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. We learn behavior, right? And most of our life takes place unconsciously, based on our habits, which are unconscious, which based on surviving. So, which comes from the family system. And we can do work on ourselves and so forth, and become more conscious and make and move in directions that we feel are healthier for us. So we have that to work with for sure. But out of that, we have a lot of choice. Now, look, if you're born, I always use the analogy, look, if you're born an apple, you're never going to become
a banana.
But there are many kinds of apples, and regardless, you just want to be the best apple you can be. The idea for all of us is like, how can we be the best of what it is who we are? Now, we can't look at our horoscope and say, well, when I look at the chart, I just look at this and I think, wow, this is what it all wants to be. It's never about saying, well, this is bad, or I can look at some stuff and say, well, look, this is, this represents a challenge, this represents a conflict or a wound. But you can, the goods, the treasure is in really doing the work. The treasure's in the process. It's not in the outcome. eventually the outcome helps, but it's the process. And we work on different parts of our life and different parts of ourself at different times of our life as we are ready to.
So, but if you were looking at someone's natal chart, to see what maybe were their karmic lessons from past lives,
Yeah.
would you look at like Pluto, Saturn, South Node?
I would certainly look at the nodes and the relationship of the nodes to probably Pluto and Neptune, the outer planets, which of course these are not even used at all in sidereal, in Vedic astrology. Only the sun, the seven planets including the sun and the nodes, right? So, and today in astrology, there are astrologers that use fixed stars, which are ancient. I mean, a lot of traditional astrology uses all the fixed stars.
Like what's a fixed star?
Algol. We have Althea. I mean, I don't use them so much, but there are hundreds of fixed stars that are commonly used in I'm kind of going brain dead with my fixed stars because I know a lot of them because they're in different constellations, and that's how they became more accessible to ancient astrologers, astronomers, because they're fixed. They don't move. They don't go anywhere. Okay, but when they noticed that certain things happened around them, certain kinds of events occurred. There's thousands of asteroids, each named. There was just one discovered. Actually, it was discovered in 1980, and that became activated last year. Asteroid Wuhan.
And what kind of quality does it represent?
It was one that was, I was just reading an article about it. It was kind of a cryptic article, but I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. Illness and destruction. Also, so there are lots of asteroids.
That's interesting.
There's Alexandra. I mean, there's probably a Gayle asteroid. It's Dimitra George. Actually, she's a fantastic astrologer, and has done a lot of the groundbreaking work on asteroids. But many astrologers have, and many use them. I use 4 of the asteroids pretty much always in my charts, which are Ceres, Juno, Pallas, and Vesta. But there are hundreds and thousands, and there are astrologers that do a chart entirely based on the asteroids. Okay, there are astrologers that do a chart entirely based on fixed stars and phases. There are as many kinds of astrologers as there are people.
Oh, interesting.
But so, what was I saying?
Can we look at the really basics for people who don't know it, using your chart as an example? So a chart has 12 houses that are governed by different constellations. There are degrees in each house.
I wish I could go get my little example.
So why don't you start us off with where your sun is, what you have in the first house, what your moon is, just so we can see an example of a basic, how you start looking at a chart.
Well, I think I'll tell you how I enter a chart. There are different ways to enter a chart, okay? I always like to look at the sun, the ascendant, and the moon sign. In different traditions, some say the sun is the most important. Others say the moon is the most important. In Vedic, the moon is more important, actually, and the phase that it's in, the dasha that it's in, and the dasha that you're in, and the mansion that it's in, and the ascendant. Others say but we don't always know the ascendant, right? Because that's based on the time of birth, which is really important because it represents what was rising on the eastern horizon, which kind of sets the division of the 12-house system. The 12 houses, let's say, very in a simplified fashion, represent, for the most part, the 12 lunar cycles. Though on occasion we have 13.
And there's 30 degrees in each house?
Roughly, yeah, because there are 360 degrees in a circle, right? So that, for simplicity's sake, that's how we divide it. And each house represents a certain department of life, but it also represents a certain process of unfoldment. So the first house, birth, roughly is equivalent to our own evolution, from like 0 to about 2.5. years of age, what was going on in our life at that point. By the time we get to the fourth house cusp, we've reached about 7, 8 years old. By the time we get to the opposite, to the descendant, to the 180 degrees across, the seventh house, we're roughly about 14, 15, entering the world of other. By the time we're about 21-ish, we're entering kind of a society, more of a public role out there. And by the time we're about 30, we're kind of coming back home again to 29, 30, of like experiencing a full cycle, and a closure of sorts happens. A lot of times we also talk about this because it corresponds to the Saturn return, which is a time for most people, 29, 30, where we reevaluate and we begin fresh again in some capacity or one way or another. So each house, so the first house is myself, second house is my resources, third house is communication, thinking, fourth house is home, fifth house is my personal self-expression, sixth house is work and health, seventh house is relationship, seventh house is joint resources, not just my resources, ninth house is opposite the third house, not just communication and lower education, higher education, meaning of life, philosophy. Fourth house is home. It's inside and outside. 10th house is career, public life, community service. 5th house is how I express myself. 11th house is community expression. What groups do I belong to? What's my voice in the larger world? 6th house is health, service, how we digest life in our own physical being. And the 12th house has to do with how we digest life psychologically, on the collective level, because it's the last sign, and the unconscious and the collective, and it has to do with like institutions, right? And we can say that roughly each one of these houses represents a woman, a very well known and she was a real giant in the world of astrology by the name of Zipporah Dobbins, who's passed now, but she kind of came up with a system which actually some people like it, I like it, some people don't, okay? There's a lot of controversy amongst us in astrology. The alphabet system, so like house 1 corresponds to Aries qualities, house 2 corresponds to Taurus qualities, because each sign, house 3 corresponds to Gemini qualities, okay? Because the first sign is Aries, the second sign is Taurus, and so forth, right? And each sign, of course, is ruled by a particular planet. And in traditional astrology, we only had two of the signs were ruled two planets ruled two signs. Venus ruled and rules actually still Taurus and Libra. Jupiter ruled Sagittarius and Pisces, and Saturn ruled Aquarius and Capricorn.
And Mercury, Gemini,
and Gemini and Virgo. That's correct. And now, since with the discovery of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, we've assigned Uranus to Aquarius as well, Neptune to Pisces, and Pluto also to Scorpio. I always look at the traditional rulers as well as the modern rulers. It's really, I think.
And where is your sun?
My sun is in Pisces.
In what house?
It's actually, I was born right at sunrise. So it's right, it was rising. It's kind of like a little bit more on the 12th, but it's also a little bit on the 1st. It's right on smack. So I am a Pisces. So I am a double Pisces, because the sun was rising when I was born and the sun was in Pisces, so I'm a double Pisces, right? Pisces tend to be a lot more less visible, actually, or rather, Pisces tends to be, it's a sign that is really sensitive, really intuitive. You know, I don't want to get into the whole thing of Pisces since I'm a Pisces, but for the most part, most people that meet me don't guess I'm a Pisces, because Pisces tends to be a bit more retiring by nature, more quiet, more in the background, sort of witnessing rather than taking action. But the sun was rising, so I'm much more visible than other traditionally. And also, and this goes true, it doesn't matter what sign you are, if you have the sun in the 12th house, you do tend to witness more rather than be out there. A lot of politicians have Sun in the 12th also, because you tap into the collective. The 12th house is the collective, okay? And you have to be in tune with collective. So it depends on, and there are many different ways we can talk. There are 3 symbols really for Pisces. There is the artist, the poet, the inspired person who writes about the magic of the universe and God and mysticism. There is the priest, the nun, the monk, the doctor, the people who want to save, help others from suffering. Because in the 12th house, after experiencing all that, you're really tuned into suffering, you know. And then, of course, it's also associated with substances, alcoholism. It's the alky, it's the druggie, it's the person who just the pain is too much. Can't handle it. It's too much. But ultimately, I think all of these 3 symbols, I always, when I think of strong Pisces energy, it's about wanting to reconnect to the divine, to the collective, to the divine, to God, or whatever our
What
nature
about the
is.
2 fishes? That's what you see.
And that's all, yeah. And which is actually the sign of Christianity, right?
The fish,
Right?
yeah.
And it's about sacrifice. It's about sacrifice, going with the flow, wanting to just move with it, and then fighting the ego, fighting the self, fighting to move upstream, you know, and oftentimes being of 2 minds also. It's one of those dual signs of it's kind of like the consciousness dealing with unconsciousness, the intellect dealing with
Sensitivity,
well,
emotions.
and also I think of it as our higher nature fighting with our lower nature. You know, that which wants to connect and do good works, that which kind of gets says, I'm tired, I just kind of want to go just do something else. And anyway, so that's a little bit about me.
Where is your moon?
And
is
my
in
moon
Aries?
is in Aries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In what house?
Well, it depends on what system you use. In the system that I use, it's in the 2nd house, which has to do, which I associate. People with moon in Aries tend to be very kind of excitable, very fiery, very spontaneous, impulse, all of those things, which I am and which I've been. You know, I think we mellow with age. But also because it's in the 2nd house, it's in the house traditionally ruled by Taurus. It's had the influence has been a much more less volatile, I'd say. Though interesting enough, because the moon has to do with how we feel. The 2nd house also has to do with finances, resources. It seems to me like and the moon goes through phases. Wherever the moon is in our life, we can go through phases with it, with that department of our life. And, you know, doesn't matter what I have in the bank, some days I'll feel rich, other days I'll feel poor. It's just kind of how I'm feeling, you know. It's like
A cycle.
it's a cycle, exactly. But I tend to be pretty, you know, all the things that you would think of as Aries.
Where would a strong opposition or square be? An example in your chart. Do you have one of those, and how is it played out?
Well, we should use somebody else's chart, but sure, if you want to use mine. Okay, I have a very, very tight, I'm not going to use the asteroids, but just the signs. And of the planets and simple ones. Moon is a good example. It's with Mars. And I have the moon in Aries, which is ruled by Mars, and I have Mars in Capricorn. And they're very tight squared. Mars is in the 11th house of community, service, friendships, goals.
So a square is there 90 degrees apart.
It's a 90 degree, yeah. And so I've often felt conflicted between my duties, my obligations. Capricorn tends to be very responsible, very commitment, and very goal-oriented. And Mars is there. It wants to make it happen. It also initiates projects, and I initiate anyway because I've got my moon in Aries. But a lot of times that has been, you know, the moon also represents family. It represents what makes us feel safe, secure, home, comfortable. And a lot of times my goals, my commitments, my self-made obligations have been challenging in regards to my family. And how it is that I want to continue to nurture my home. And so I've had to, it's taken time to find a better balance there, and a way that I can actually work with these energies in a constructive but more harmonious way. And also it's quick to anger, but Moon in Aries is quick to anger. Something I want to tell you is that whenever we have a theme in our chart, it's going to be repeated in many different ways. It's not just isolated, because as we know, in our life, we have certain themes that, I don't care how old we are, they're the same themes. It's like same dance, different day, different year, different
Life
decade,
lessons.
It's the same old stuff. It spins around, it wears different clothes, different masks, same old stuff, but it just looks a little differently. So, but each time, I think we have the opportunity to refine it. And what we learn is what we teach, and what we can be most adept at, because if we've done our work, we have something to share, some experience to offer.
Where do you have a trine or a 60 degree or 120 degrees that's been useful to you, that's been helpful and made things easier? Is there an example?
I do, actually. I've got a moon, again, it's part of a trine. Actually, I've got some, let's use this other one, forget the moon. The sun and the ascendant, and actually I didn't mention, but Mercury in my chart is in late Aquarius, very close to my sun and ascendant. So it's kind of all kind of bunched up together.
And do we call that conjunct?
Conjunct, correct.
How many degrees do they need to be
Well,
conjunct?
I like to, depending on with the sun, I'll allow 8 to 10. The moon about 8. Everything else depends on the planet, on how it reads in the chart. But 6, 7, you have to kind of gauge it. But that's kind of a general rule for me. The sun and ascendant in my chart are exactly trine my within a couple degrees, my North Node, Jupiter and Neptune in my chart. Jupiter and Neptune also are the rulers of my sun and ascendant. So this actually, again, like I said, themes are repeated here. They're trine in Scorpio, early Scorpio, in my 8th house, which is also the house of Scorpio. So the theme becomes even more magnified. I have found this, without going into astrology lessons here, very useful in working with others, going deep. Scorpio likes to go deep. Scorpio likes to look at the shadow. It wants to, one of the issues of Scorpio too is intimacy. How do we really bond? Intimacy is about allowing us to see one another. That's how we become intimate. And the way we do that is through trusting. And the way we do that is through allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. So one of the gifts I've had from having these placements is, aside of inheritance and other things that we can talk about with the 8th house in Scorpio, and many other words we can use, but to keep it simple here. It has allowed me, I think it's been one of my gifts, in my opinion, ask my clients, I can really work well with people, and I can go deep, and people, for the most part, like to work with me, they trust me, and there is a genuine ease of energy there. Yeah.
Nice.
But it also exacerbates the Piscean qualities, because I can go untethered. Not only am I a Pisces, but it's trine to Jupiter and Neptune, so that energy runs very freely. So it's like, there she goes.
I love it. That's great. If people want to just see like a basic natal chart, is there a particular website that you would recommend?
There are a couple here.
Free. And by natal chart, we mean the chart when you were born. So you need to know your birth, time, and place.
The best place to go, there are 2 places that I would recommend. There are many, and you can figure it out. But the 2 places that are reliable are astrotheme.com, astrotheme.com, and the other one is astro.com, which also is known as Astrodienst, Astro D-E-I-N-S-T. And they've got a place there where you can plug in your information and get your chart up. As far as getting those interpretations by computer, I strongly discourage it. Even though some things, of course, are going to ring true, astrology, the language, is much more complex than that. It's about how do you put it all together. I mean, I think it's great if you're interested. I can recommend lots of great beginner books, and some of them are cocktail books. So you can look stuff up and really kind of get some things. But then you say, oh, this says this, but then that says this, and it contradicts this. How does it all work together? Well, it does all work together if you know how the language works.
Got it. And what about the newspaper columnists, the astrologers who say, okay, you're a Gemini and this date you should watch out for this and this. Is there any validity in that at all?
Yeah, there is. Well, it depends on the author, okay? It depends largely on the author. And I also, as you know, I did that for Lotus Guide, actually for 9 years, but I've done it for other magazines for a bunch of years. I've done this a lot. Because it's kind of fun, and especially at the beginning of my career elsewhere, it was a great way to put yourself out there. And when I first came to town, I thought it'd be fun to do as a community service. But it works best if you know your sun, if your rising sign. It works best if you know your rising sign. Is there validity to that? It's fun. Is this something that you should wake up every morning and have this guide your day? Absolutely not. I am an astrologer. I do not wake up every morning and look at the chart and say, well, let's see what I'm going to do today. I'm not like that. I have friends who are. I'm not like that. That's not my cup of tea. But yeah, there are some columns that are actually quite good.
Like, who comes to mind?
Well, they're no longer doing it. Some people comes to mind. Right now, off the top of my head, I mean, Michael Luton used to do it, fantastic. Christopher Renstrom, fantastic. Who comes to mind right now that's doing it? Let me think. The Mountain Astrologer.
The magazine.
The Mountain Astrologer magazine, has a very good one. It's a bi-monthly. And they have a pretty good column. Yeah, there are good columns out there. Yeah.
Okay.
But the more predictive something is, the more hogwash it is. So there.
Let's just go over a few terms that might help people who are getting involved in this. So you've mentioned the nodes, and again, those are where the lunar orbit is.
It's like where the Earth and the Moon cross together as they go around the Sun.
And what one has to do with your past life stuff. What is the North and South Node? What is their influence?
Okay, well, the North Node, in the Vedic tradition, they call it the head and the tail of the dragon. The North Node tends to want to eat everything that comes of its way. So it has more like I want to learn, I want more of what it is, okay? The South Node is kind of like your comfort zone. You already kind of know that stuff. This is where you've been there. You know that. So this is kind of what carries you, but it's also where we can get stuck in habits, okay? So the North Node can be sort of what it is that we're striving for in order to grow spiritually. And the significance between the Earth and the Moon, where they cross as we go around the Sun, because I wish I could bring my computer and show you my little diagrams. But it's in many ways the Sun, the Earth will show. The Sun has to do also with our own spiritual nature. The Moon has to do with the public. The Moon has to do with the masses. So it's like also, what is our role? Where do we integrate with our collective? Where do we fit in? How do we fit into society? How do we fit in community? How do we fit in ourselves?
The ascendant or the rising sign, I've always heard of that as kind of our persona that we present to the world.
Yeah.
So you would present as a Pisces, but you really don't. You present more as your moon in the second house, your Aries.
No, I think I present like a sun, like the sun, which is ruled by Leo.
Ah. Interesting.
I mean, look, I'm a double Pisces. So some people get it. They get it. If you know astrology, you can pick it up.
And then another influence in the chart.
So, like, excuse me, let me go back. So, let's say if you have moon rising, the moon was on the ascendant. You're going to present, let's say if you're moon rising in Virgo, you're going to present more like a Virgo, but a very emotional one that's very moody, one that's very, 2 steps backwards, 3 steps back, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. The moon is going to be very influential. If you have Mercury on the ascendant, you're going to represent more mercurial. I don't care what sign it's in. If you have Saturn on the ascendant, you're going to be a lot more reserved.
Sirius.
I don't care what sign it's in. Okay.
Interesting. And then also the chart, you could be more fire, earth, air, or water.
Right, the elements, right.
The elements.
Yeah.
So each constellation is associated with an element?
Right. There's 4 elements, 3 water signs. We start with the fire signs: Aries, Leo, and Sag. And then Earth, Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. Then air, Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. Then water, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. And so the fire signs are very dynamic, fiery, warm, enthusiastic, creative, ready to roar. The earth signs are more resourceful, crafty. They like to make things. They're down to earth. They want to build things. They want to create security, and be of service and work with the land and the community. The air signs want to relate, want to express ideas, want to learn things, want to communicate. And the water signs are the feeling signs, that it's more about how do I connect on a more emotional level? They're intuitive, sensitive, sympathetic, empathetic.
So to give one more example, I'm a Gemini sun sign, Cancer rising, Libra moon. So just knowing that, what would you say about a person with that chart?
I would say that you're a Gemini. Let's take it with the sun. You're somebody whose purpose and whose power, because the sun represents our power. Who do we want to become? Who are we? The sun is like how we assert ourselves. In Gemini, you're someone who wants to share information, communicate, connect with others, to communicate, to share information, knowledge. That's what Geminis do. In Cancer, it's about knowledge. Also, it's about nurturing, supporting, wanting to connect, wanting to intuit, wanting to bring together on a sympathetic, empathetic level your life experience with others. It's much more intuitive. It's much more imaginative, very strong imagination. The water signs have, and Cancer.
So that could tie into my intuitive work, my clairvoyant work.
And also, you have with a Cancer rising, the moon in the 4th house. It's in Libra, so it's 4 signs away. It's in the 4th house. Repeats that Cancer theme of like safety, security. Home is probably really important to you. You like to be. This becomes a place where you work from. You want to be again communicate, reach out. Balance is a real big piece for Libra. How do you balance? Communicating about balancing.
And teaching women's studies fits in with that of wanting equality and fairness.
It's ruled by Venus, absolutely. And also Cancer is a feminine, we call it a feminine sign.
Great. Is there anything else that you would like people to understand about astrology that we've left out, that you think, we got to include that?
Well, actually, I think we talked a lot about many things. The bottom line is that it's a language. It's symbolic, archetypal. I don't like people to get stuck on certain ways of thinking about getting trapped by certain definitions. Yes, if you have a Mercury in Taurus as an example, yes, you're going to be probably a little bit more stubborn than, let's say, a Mercury in Sag, who wants to explore every single possibility and then cherry pick out the pieces that fit into their philosophy, because Sag is about philosophy. But there are, depending on what level of consciousness we come into this life with, will determine how we use. I mean, twins are born with the same chart often, and yet still make different choices, right? So, I mean, again, they're not going to make wildly different choices, but the outcomes based on choices can be a little bit different. With a Mercury in Taurus, can go as easily into the arts as they can go into finance. So not to get trapped. And also something that I want to share that I feel so important. And I get asked this a lot, is this good or is this bad? Is this good or bad? Is this good? Is this bad? When will this end? That's another question, First of all, I don't know what's good, what's bad, because out of bad, challenging.
Our growth.
It's how we grow. We don't grow out of joy. We grow at the rate of pain if we're willing to do the work, We don't grow at the rate of joy and frivolousness and party. We grow through really getting in touch with our heart and our spirit, connecting our own inner being. And again, it's like taking all of our chart and recognizing that there are times in our lives that we're going to be working with different aspects of our own inner self, and it manifests as within, so without. It's like nothing will happen externally unless we first imagine it internally, whether we know it or not, whether it's conscious or unconscious. And as we go forward, we're co-creating this universe. There is no script here that this is what's going to happen. We know the tendency, we know the trajectory, we have an idea of how we're going. But we are also, because as physics has shown, we are, our perception and how we meet reality changes that reality at that moment.
Quantum physics definitely says that, yeah.
So we have choice. I mean, yes, I have choices. I live here. What I do can have an impact here and now in my life. Me sitting around meditating, thinking I'm going to become something I'm not, isn't going to really help me or anyone else. So for all of us to really, learn as much as we can about ourselves, explore, not become consumed, but, be reflective, and to recognize that there's nowhere to go, nothing to do, and no one to become, because it keeps evolving. The moment we feel like we know something, we need to be careful because there's more to come.
I like what Jung said, that the aim of life is to become individuated, which means to become conscious of the unconscious. And since the unconscious is, 80-90%, it seems like astrology is a useful kind of specific tool
for those who, yes, and like, look, the kind of astrology I like to do is, I think of it more sort of, looking at, the person's inner characteristics and qualities and what they come with. And it's not about telling them what's going to happen, though, timing is fabulous with astrology because, like we were talking at the very beginning, we look at our children's charts and we think, oh my God, when is this phase going to end? Or, we can time things. This is really helpful. But, it is about becoming more conscious of our unconscious, and that happens when we're ready. But, some people go to some astrologers because they want to know, when are they going to meet, this is really common.
Oh, yeah.
When am I going to meet my soulmate?
Right.
When am I going to meet this? When is this going to happen? When is that going to happen? Well, my question always is, when are you ready to do that work? And when it comes to relationships, it's way more complex. It's not just, boy meets girl and the birds and the bees. It's because we're dealing with unconscious complexes. And so in any relationship, we need to be willing to do the work.
What's interesting to me...
Can I say one
Please.
more thing? And in relationship, it's not just about the Venus and the Mars and the sex and the attraction and all that. It's really, I find, one of the most important symbols in long-term relationships is communication.
Oh, yes.
The ability to communicate.
Right.
It's, yeah, because the other stuff, yeah, the attraction can be there, but that's not gonna make anything last. You know, the passion can be there. That's not going to make anything last. Communication, though, can make a lot of things last.
So you want to look at a prospective partner's Mercury, how it's aspected.
Yeah, absolutely. And the moon, I like to look at.
And the moon.
Because those are our habits. We want to see if we have somewhat compatible habits. I mean, there's going to be work to do, for sure. But we're going to need to have something to work with, you know.
Right.
And the ascendant makes a real big difference. Because that's how we approach life. And so we want to have a similar way that we approach and see life.
Interesting.
Similar. Not the same, but similar. Compatible.
What this makes me think of is that I just finished this trilogy about visionary scientists, 65 of them. And what you said is true, that the most common sign for them was Sagittarius. And they are interested in deep questions.
Philosophy, the meaning of life.
Meaning of life, which is what these people are. And now I'm starting on a book about young women climate activists, and I don't have very many sun signs yet, but so far more Libra. I don't know. What would you predict for girls who are in the vanguard of speaking out against hurting the planet?
That's a very generalized question.
Right.
So I'm reluctant to answer it. But we do have a lot of young people here that have strong Sagittarian and Capricornian qualities. Neptune involved. They were born with Neptune in Capricorn. And even with Neptune in Aquarius, which is visionary, which is like a community, society. How do we change the world? And it's more generational.
What age group has those kind of?
So people that were born from 2000, in the last 20 years. Prior to that, it was Neptune. Neptune in Capricorn, Pluto was in Sag. It's the meaning of life. It's creating different structures of how we live.
Interesting.
So it's generational. Now, as far I was talking to someone recently. What were we discussing? And about autism and being on the spectrum. How a lot of younger people are on the spectrum these days.
Like Greta Thunberg, yeah.
A lot of younger people. And we've seen that with Uranus in Aquarius. There's certain themes, and there was someone who just did a great article on it. We were just talking about it. I don't remember, but there's certain signatures. But just to say what sign, I'm not so sure I can really, because I would also look at Sirius. I would look at Pallas. I look at some of the asteroids, but it's more generational.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great.